Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and this afternoon it's Friday, ladies and gents, and hopefully you're all looking forward to your weekend that lies ahead. You're finishing up. Some people might even leave early, and then you've got the weekend to look forward to. And part of that weekend will, of course, be Celtic playing Hibernian at Easter Road. I'm today joined by James French, dialing in from Ireland, and we have Brian Degnan dialing in from England. We may also have Alan Morrison, the man with the data, the man with the numbers, to join us. I think he's got a thing or two to say about proposed takeovers in Scottish football. We'll focus on how that affects Celtic. Before we go anywhere with today's discussion, I really would like to say condolences, heartfelt condolences to the friends and family and the wider Celtic community that knew Evan Williams. Evan Williams, of course, was Celtic's goalkeeper for 5 seasons. He joined the club in 1969 and he remained there, as I say, for 5 campaigns. And what I would like to point out, I had the absolute pleasure of meeting Evan when I was making the Nearly Mocking documentary, which is just up there. And Evan Williams met us, gave us loads of his time. He was just a gentleman, an absolute gentleman, loved talking about Celtic, loved Celtic. We signed him from Wolverhampton Wanderers. Whilst he was on loan at Aston Villa, it's got to be pointed out, he was previously a player for Third Lanark and then he went to Clyde. But what I was going to point out today, guys, right, in Celtic's history, there are just 30 players who have played in a European final. And Evan Williams is one of them. Everybody remembers the Lions: Simpson, Craig Gemmell, Murdoch McNeil, Clark Johnson, Wallace, Chalmers, Alden, Lennox. But of course, we did get into the final 3 years later, and Evan kept goal on that fateful night. He was outstanding by all accounts. There has only been 16 players to have played in a European Cup final for a Scottish club, and he is one of those as well. So rest in peace, Evan Williams. Thoughts and prayers with everyone who knew him. Now, we're going to bring Alan Morrison in as well today. It's been a long time coming, but here he is. Alan, welcome to the show. How are you?
All right, thanks, and thank you very much, and hello, everybody.
Well, listen, it's been a great week, a fantastic week. Even though we are no longer in Europe, I think you can take quite a lot of positives from the last couple of weeks, the last 2 games against Bayern Munich and the campaign as a whole. James, in the aftermath of that, how are you feeling about European progress? That was a big question that everybody was asking Brendan when he came back.
Yeah, I think the raw emotion of it is kind of still there just because of the nature of how we lost it. It's kind of a sucker punch to them kind of final moments. But I think the bigger picture is maybe not now, but I think in a year or two we'll look back on the campaign as a whole, and in particular the 2 games against Bayern Munich, and just kind of see how well we performed and kind of how big a challenge Bayern were, and we rose to that challenge. I think it was kind of a tie that could have went kind of 2 ways. It could have very easily been Borussia Dortmund-esque, in particular the away fixture, but Rodgers obviously shown and the players shown that they've really learned from that and they've really matured over the course of the campaign. And I think the magnitude of the performance against Bayern will only be appreciated maybe in a year or two when we've hopefully went through another Champions League campaign, and maybe we haven't got top 24 because it's not a given every year. You look at the sides that missed out this year, obviously Leipzig, and like there's going to be quality sides missing out on that top 24 every year. Maybe we get a difficult draw, and I think when kind of time passes in a year or two, we will look back on the tie against Bayern and say that in terms of how we competed and the kind of the quality the players shown, we really think that this team was really special and had a lot of quality. And listen, hopefully they can stay together next year, but we know the nature of Celtic is that we maybe might lose 1 or 2, but hopefully whoever we bring in can kind of up the level again, and we can keep trying to make progress in Europe, which obviously is what Rodgers kind of came back to achieve.
You know, there's lots there actually, James. I think the first one is that overriding feeling of emotion after the game. Brian, I mean, people have been talking about being proud of the team. Absolutely, 100%. We were in the tie until the last kick of the ball against Bayern Munich. A team I would be interested to hear your thoughts on how they're going to progress this season, how far they can go in this tournament. But they're sitting top of the Bundesliga, which isn't a bad league, a very strong league. We're not even talking money here. We're just talking quality in terms of, you look at Bayern Munich and you look at the strength and depth. And I think that's where we probably lost the game, Brian. It was just that bit of quality. We said yesterday, you're looking at the bench, maybe Brendan had 1 or 2 ideas in mind for extra time, I don't know. but it did feel as though we just didn't have that added quality and depth, did we, when it came right down to it? Because when you look at the players Bayern Munich brought on, sensational players.
Yeah, I mean, look, the gulf in quality between Bayern Munich and most teams is absolutely massive. I mean, Musiala is just an absolute revelation of a football player. So throughout the team, they've got two squads that could win most games. We maybe get that domestically, but it's a big leap in the Champions League. And I think the interesting thing about so on the game itself, I thought we were excellent. I think echoed what everyone else says. But you could see as the players started to tire just towards the end, they were clinging on more than they had been for the full game. And I don't even think it's as much the lack of quality in the squad. I think it's and I was talking about this last week, it's the lack of physicality to come on and keep up that level. Because if you look at the people who stood out, Schlupp was excellent.
Mm-hmm.
He was really, really good. I think Engels was comfortably his best game for Celtic. I thought he really looked strong in the game. We don't have many players like that, because obviously without Bernardo on the bench that can come on and give that same level of physicality. And I think that's what we need to improve on as a squad. So it's almost less about the amount of money you spend on a player or the quality of the player. It's almost that physical, that extra 10% you need for Europe, the height, the speed, the power. Because I think that is where we were more comfortable. We were never bullied at any point in the game. And I think that gave us the confidence to play just a bit more freely like we would. Not necessarily domestically, but play our game just to keep a bit calmer. So again, I think it's not necessarily just extra quality off the bench, which obviously would be good, but it's that physical presence you can bring off the bench in a number of positions that we lacked. But again, I think across the park we were excellent. I thought McGregor was excellent. I thought he was really good. But again, for me, Engels was an absolute standout. And again, that sort of profile of player, that physical type of players who we should be targeting, so that in those situations, maybe they're not quite as good as the players ahead of them, but they can still do that job and make up for that physicality and not be bullied. And I think that will help us next season. Because to James' point, we will lose players, there's no doubt, but it's how we recruit and how we replace them. And just try to bridge that gap as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, without a doubt. You see, when we look at the Bayern Munich performance, Alan, and some of the players that have been mentioned there, Schlupp, who I tipped to play on the basis of the physical aspect of his game, but also because of the Crystal Palace connection. And Liam Carrigan quite rightly pointed out that can work against you if the guy you're up against has got you on toast. And I get that, but I think he did really well. Arnie Engels been standing up for him all season, even when he's been playing poorly. Because I do think there were signs there, Alan, and I'm going to go right back to Ange Postecoglou's second season, pre-season, before we got drawn against Real Madrid, and you and I discussed the type of player, the calibre of player, and what that looks like. The physicality, that's the word that has become cliched now. What does that even look like in midfield? And I think that back then you were concerned about our midfield not having that type of player. And you were talking about what we would be up against when we faced Real Madrid. Is Arnie Engels that type of player that you were talking about? Is he the mould that you were referring to back then? Although he's not fully developed yet. Is he the type of player you were talking about?
Yeah, in theory, I think you can't argue that he doesn't fit that mould physically. The potential issue with Engels, and the reason I say potential is because I still think he's a naturally talented footballer and a well-balanced young man who's capable of adjusting, learning, developing. So all that. But we essentially bought a player who'd never played in the style of football that Celtic play and never played for a team that plays the way Celtic play and never played in 2 games a week relentlessly for week after week after week after week, high pressing, with an expectation to win every game, with an expectation in his role to be getting into the box, to be scoring goals, to be creating goals, and to be defending as well. So this is a big step up for him in that regard. And I think he's done fine, given he doesn't, there was probably no evidence that he had that capability to perform that role, but he certainly got the physical attributes, and he seems to have the mental attributes. So I'm very hopeful for him. In fact, I'm just writing a piece comparing him to Matt O'Reilly, and I'm focusing on the Champions League games, not the SPFL games, because they're very different players, obviously. But your point, which leads me on to, your point about how the team's evolving in that sense, and it was interesting that we elected to play Schlupp at left back instead of Taylor, Trusty at left centre back instead of Scales, and then we've now got Engels rather than O'Reilly. And I would say, if you look at the players that they've replaced, I would probably argue that O'Reilly's a more subtle, on-the-ball manipulator of the football than Engels. I would say Taylor is a more shrewd passer of the ball and taker up of positions and line breaker of passing than Schlupp, and that Scales is a more reliable passer of the ball through the lines than Trusty. So we've as a team, there's a trade-off here between on-ball progression and speed, strength, and physicality.
Yeah,
and actually, that's just the way modern football is. Unfortunately, now, I say unfortunately because I'm very much a romantic in terms of liking to see sort of silky passing football. But having said all that, I'm also a realist, and if you're going to compete with these teams, you're going to have to at least match them physically, and then hope that you've got enough technical ability to hurt them also, which I think Celtic did do against Bayern. And one of the things in any analytical, so that hopefully that addresses your question. Just in terms of on the match, what you try and do within any analytical framework is come up with the attribution of why did this happen? Why did the game go the way it did? I think that's a really complicated question, but what I think we have to say absolutely is that the Celtic were terrifically well organised, calm, and delivered performances across the two legs, more so in the second leg, much more so in the second leg. And why do I say that? Because it was interesting. But this is quite an untypical Bayern Munich historically. Historically, Bayern Munich are a side who are probably the best club team in the world, actually, absolutely hammering teams that are beneath them. They are the best flat track bully club in the world. The number of 4, 5, 6, 7-0 wins they get is just ridiculous. And then they didn't let Celtic breathe in that first half at Parkhead. The Celtic could barely get out their own half. Could barely muster a shot at goal. In fact, I don't think they hardly did muster a shot at goal. And then they got the 2-goal lead, and then they kind of thought, well, a bit Italian-like. Thought, well, we're 2 up. That's it. We're done. We can just ride this out. And Celtic had a right good go at them. But in the second leg, I was expecting an absolute hurricane to start with.
Yeah.
Because Bayern Munich are the best pressing side in the Champions League. They are the most effective in terms of volume of pressing and effectiveness of pressing. And actually, Celtic are not far behind. So I was expecting a real chaotic kind of mishmash of a game, and it didn't pan out that way. And I think there's probably many reasons for that, not least that both sides have been playing every 3 days for like ever. And I think, they just come off a really tough game at the weekend against Leverkusen. And we've been playing 2 games a week for God knows how long. So they didn't actually press that insanely. And I think, given how defensive Kompany was in Leverkusen, where effectively, although they played badly, they didn't have a shot at goal till the 73rd minute, and everyone was like, oh, they're terrible. By getting a 0-0 at Leverkusen, they effectively won the league now. It's almost very unlikely that Leverkusen are going to come back from 8 points behind. And then you might argue, well, that wasn't a great performance by Bayern. If you read the German press, they got slaughtered, but they're through. So I think Kompany's given Bayern a slightly different style, a slightly different, maybe a more pragmatic style, if you want to use that word. And maybe that was part of the reason. I think they were caught a little bit between being a goal up and not realizing that Celtic had a lot of pace on the break and not wanting to overcommit too much, and being probably a little bit fatigued as a squad. I think it's a combination of all of those things, and Celtic just being damn good. What Celtic didn't do well at Celtic Park was they were great without the ball, and they were very poor on the ball, and they remedied that in the Allianz. They were very good on the ball, and that's what they had to be. And they were very brave because they pushed a very high line. And in the first 10 minutes, 4 times the ball went across our midfield, right to left. And I was thinking, this is just insane. We're going to cut to ribbons here. But it kind of settled down after that, and we were fine. So there's a multitude of factors here as to explain this performance, but I don't think you can take away from the fact that Celtic were organised, they were brave, they were good on the ball, and they defended very well. And it was a very, very mature performance. And what you cannot say is that there hasn't been progress and there hasn't been improvement season on season. And that is the most important aspect for me.
I totally agree with you, Alan. We've kind of been going back to that from the very early days when James Mackenzie asked the question, what does it look like? What does European progress look like? And Brendan, I'm not saying he struggled to answer the question, Brian, but, it wasn't definitive. It wasn't definitive as to what European progress looks like. But I'm with Alan here. I feel like we are making it. We've made it to a knockout round, albeit a playoff. It's a knockout round for the first time since 2013. And you look at that and think, well, obviously that's progress. The other thing I would like to say in relation to it is I was chatting away to someone today who's not a Celtic fan, and they were saying how impressed they were with how we played it out from the back. And the point I made, Brian, was that's 4 years in the making. We started doing that, in earnest. We started doing that under Ange Postecoglou, and now we're doing it with confidence. We're doing it in the right way because there's certain coaches who are the progenitors of a certain style, and everybody else they're just copycats, Brian. There's a Xerox of it, and they don't have the players to do it, but they think, all right, okay, and they just, it's in vogue, so let's follow that trend. That's not the way Celtic have done it. Celtic have done it with the principle in mind when Ange was here. And I don't even think we played it as well under Ange as we did the other night. The way we played that ball out from the back was really, like, it was brave, but it was with confidence, And Alistair Johnson, for example, I seen him on the ball and I think to myself, 2 seasons ago, I'm not sure he would have been as confident as that. So I think we've cracked it. We've absolutely cracked it. Was that something, a part of the game the other night, Brian, that stood out for you?
Yeah, it was. And I think, to be fair to Brendan Rodgers, he deserves massive credit because in his first spell, Europe could be a bit of a nightmare at times. Although I think actually his record wasn't as bad as people think. I think it's just when he lost, it lost heavily. But actually, I think his record was decent. But you just felt at times, just be a bit more pragmatic, like stick to your principles, but just tweak it a bit. And I think you really saw that. And I think people were scared after the Dortmund game. Or like, this is going to be the same again. We might get a result against the teams we're supposed to. We'll probably get smashed off the teams we're not. But actually, I was chatting to someone actually the other day, and I was saying if it's not for that Dortmund game, I don't think the Atalanta game happens. Because I think he sort of went, right, okay, maybe we just need to tweak this slightly. So we still pressed, we still tried to play the way we play, but just a bit more sensible when we chose to do it, how we chose to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that confidence that, we're not going to get bullied off the ball physically or not as much as in the past. And we're not going to get hammered here if we just stick to what we're doing. So then by that, you go, right, okay, we're not getting hammered. We're confident enough. Then we can start playing it a bit more. We can relax a bit more. That confidence starts to build. And what you want to hope is, if you look at this campaign compared to last season's, it's night and day. And although there's been squad changes and stuff, essentially you can start to see a massive improvement in the mentality of how we're playing and the way we're doing it. So even if there's changes to the squad again, which I imagine there will be, next season should be the same, right? We should be even more confident with how they press, even more confident with how we deal with things physically, even more confident off the ball. Look, it's not to say that next season that means we need to get to the last 16 or the quarterfinals or any of that. What it means is we play well, we play a style that keeps us competitive, and that's what we build on season. And I think that, I speak about it a lot, but my favourite period watching Celtic in a lot of ways was under Gordon Strachan, especially in Europe, because I always felt we were going to win. Especially at home, I always felt. And I always joke that he got to the last 16 of the Champions League with Stephen McManus and Gary Caldwell as centre-backs. But it was how the team played.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that they all necessarily all sat in and panicked and defended. And they just knew how to play that way, and he knew what he had and knew how to get the best of it. And I think you're seeing that to a degree, although the quality of player is better under Rodgers. And, I've never been trying to slaughter him if I think he's been making mistakes or he's been a bit snippy with his attitude, but he deserves amazing credit for the job he's done this season. I really think it's quite remarkable, actually.
Yeah, I agree with you. We spoke yesterday about this kind of focus that he seemed to have over the last week or so, where it was like he knew exactly what he was going into with these two games, and he had his team mentally ready and focused for them. And like you say, Brian, you talk about the impact of that Dortmund game then creating a situation against Atalanta where we absolutely show a pragmatism that maybe we wouldn't have done. And then against Dortmund over the two games, we've seen a wee bit of the both, I think, both styles. We've been open and expansive, and we've been really entertaining to watch during that period. I mean, I watched the game back the other night. We had 5 brilliant chances above and beyond the goal that was scored. Maeda, I think, had 3 of them. By the way, no easy chances, but good chances. McGregor had the first one. And then obviously the ball broke to Kuhn in the 6-yard box as well. We had brilliant chances.
And the key thing about that, Paul, as well, is it wasn't a chance. It wasn't just lumping the ball up for Kenny Maeda to run onto because they're fast.
Yeah.
And even one of my games I enjoyed watching the most, although we get beat, was actually the Aston Villa game.
Mm-hmm.
For that example, because I thought their wingers are 6'2" and big athletes, and you're going, how are we going to compete there? And although we lost narrowly, I thought it was an excellent game to watch, and I thought we're getting better at this level. We look more confident at this level now. There's still a massive gap, but you can see mentally we're getting there.
No, I agree with that. A big shout out as well, actually, today to Thomas Dunn. Thomas is based in Australia, and he watches Acsom on a daily basis. And I know this because he even went to the lengths of sending over an Acsom banner which said "We never stop," and that was during the old lockdown. He sent that over from Australia. And it was his birthday on Wednesday. So happy birthday to you, Thomas. And I hope you're well. And stay in touch and stay tuning in. I seen wee shots of him watching the iPad the other day. And it still blows my mind that people do that all over the world. Absolutely sensational commitment. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. What do you think about our progress in Europe now that the dust is settled against Bayern Munich? What's your memories of Evan Williams? We're also going to be talking about the canonisation of Tommy Burns. Isle Berkovic's comments, we've not touched on them. He has a real strong attitude towards what he calls the Irish. And it just so happens that we've got James French on. So I'm going to ask James if he agrees with that. And also there's a few other bits to pick on in relation to the Hibs game this weekend. Before we get moving, 9 in a row, here we go. Worked with Evan for a short time, lovely guy. Absolutely sad news, says Jungle Line, about Evan Williams as well. We're just saying, Alan, that he's one of, really, let's be honest, very few players who, A, have played in a European final for Celtic, but also who have played for a Scottish club in a European Cup final. Only 16 players, and he's one of them. Slightly before your time, Alan, but I think one of the most amusing stories that I read was we were playing Fiorentina, and there was an indirect free kick, and he was switched on. And I'm thinking it's the run-up to actually the final against Feyenoord, because we played some great sides. We played Fiorentina, Leeds United, Benfica, like great sides, and then we lost the final, and Feyenoord turned out to be a great side. So it's an indirect free kick. Nerves of steel. Evan Williams just stands on his goal and lets it go in the net. And everybody's gone mad because they didn't realise, had he tried to maybe save it and got a palm to it, it would have counted as a goal. And he says he was a brave man to do that with Jock Stein in the dugout, that's for sure. But Evan Williams is being remembered today, Alan. And Achilles' heel was the goalkeeper for Jock Stein. Famously, he signed 20 goalkeepers played under him. I think he signed most of them. But Evan Williams was one of the most consistent.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and as I say, it was a bit before my time, so I won't pretend to have seen him play, unfortunately. But what you just said there about letting that indirect free kick go in is braver than you might think, because in that time period, as Brian Glanville has exposed, Italian clubs especially were known to bribe referees. And in fact, Liverpool in 64, 65, against Inter Milan, the same Inter Milan team that Celtic played in 67, lost the semi-final against, I think it was Inter Milan, where a goal had gone in from an indirect free kick, and it was given. Because this is one of the instances where Brian Glanville had the evidence that there was effectively refereeing tampering was going on. So he was very brave indeed, and perhaps fortunate in this particular instance that didn't result in a goal.
No, without a doubt, yeah. And some people go back to some of these games Celtic were involved in with referees that may have been influenced in certain nefarious ways. But yeah, that was a great story from Evan Williams, the man again who played in that incredible semi-final double header against Leeds United as well. Patrick Hone DJ, hi troops from Coventry. Patrick, great to hear from you. We need to go into Saturday's game with the same attitude as Tuesday. We're going to be talking about changes, obviously rotating the squad. I was looking at some of the guys the other night there, James. I'm going to start with Rio Atati, for example, who just run himself into the ground. What kind of changes do you expect tomorrow? It's a 12:30 kickoff tomorrow, Easter Road. And Rodgers, I think, has rotated really well. What do you expect to change tomorrow?
Yeah, well, firstly, kind of touching on kind of going to Easter Road and Hibs, like I think it's always been a place where Rodgers has notoriously kind of struggled. I think under Ange, where we probably fared kind of a bit better there. But I think like the nature of going to Easter Road and as well with David Gray and Hibs, I think they're seem to be kind of on the up at the minute, kind of playing well. So I think it's probably a game where Rodgers will not want to rotate too heavily. In terms of the options from the other night, I think obviously a lot of guys look like they're out on their feet, like kind of playing 90 minutes against a team of Munich's quality, doing a lot of kind of defensive work. It's bound to really take it out of you, and I think Hatate is definitely one which we probably would like to see rotated. Nicholas Kuhn as well, who obviously came off with 25 to go or so. So I think Hatate and Kuhn are definitely two we will see maybe come out for McGowan and Yang, and it's a nice chance for Yang because I think coming into the game away in Munich, the nature of kind of how the game was going, I think it was difficult for him to kind of really showcase his talents. I think he's kind of doing a lot of defensive work rather than kind of going up the pitch and doing what he wants to do. So I think it's a nice opportunity for him going to Hibernian, kind of a challenging place to go and somewhere where he can really show that he has the quality to play for Celtic. In terms of other kind of changes, I don't think Rodgers wants to change too much, but I think Greg Taylor coming in, obviously kind of Jeffrey Schlupp playing 90 minutes. I think it's kind of a clear game for Taylor to come in, and I think Adam White obviously is going to start as well. So I think there'll be a couple of changes, but again, as we've seen domestically, Rodgers, no matter who the opponent is, he doesn't really like to alter things too much, and especially going to Hibs and Easter Road and what is notoriously being kind of a tough place for Rodgers Celtic teams to go. So I think the two in particular, definitely Kuhn and Tate, because I think those two positions in particular, the guys coming in maybe don't have the same quality as those two guys.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about Easter Road, and it's not just in this spell. Brendan had some scares the last time round as well at Easter Road. They are on the up and up, Brian. They're doing really well. At one point in this season, I thought it was game over for David Gray, would be sacked. That's what happens with these teams, isn't it? Aberdeen, Hibs, Hearts, Dundee United. They go through a lot of managers, but he's turned it around. He's on a undefeated run. Quite a few draws thrown in there as well. But you know, James is right. When was the last time we went to Hibs and absolutely trounced them at Easter Road? It's been a while, hasn't it? Always
I think it's always a difficult game there, and you know, I'm glad from that they gave him the time actually to try and turn that around. It's you see so often managers getting sacked really quickly, so it was good for him. I think most people most Celtic fans have got a soft spot from after the goalie scored at Hampden to win a cup. I think that's always most special in people's minds. So
Sunshine on Leith. By the way, I only got round to watching Coldplay's version of that. Sorry to throw that in. But, you know, Coldplay, what you laughed at, Coldplay at one point were all right. They just got so big that they became a bit crap.
They butchered it, absolutely butchered it.
Yeah, and, you know, I was looking at that as a song, and I'm thinking, right, you've got the Proclaimers version and you've got the Hibs fans version, and it's neck and neck as to which is the best of those two, and then Coldplay come into the equation. And, yeah, the least said the better. But the reason I brought up Coldplay is they've got a member of their band is actually from Kirkcaldy, as is Ollie Burke, and it's any opportunity to bring Ollie Burke into the conversation, Brian. A bit like you with Dane Murray.
It is. No, you got to bring him up when you can. And just speaking about players, you mentioned them earlier. I meant to say my favourite, Eyal Berkovic, memories, big hearts and kick him in the mouth, which I think feels like the best response to his comments. We'll probably leave that one there. But yeah, on the subject of Murray and rotation, it'd be interesting to see who he swaps out tomorrow, because the effort was massive for the players.
Yeah.
I think Bernardo would be a shoe in to start probably. But yeah, I'd like to see McCowan get a game for Hatate. I think McCowan's been excellent when he's played. Big Scales to come back in probably, and you might consider resting AJ, because I thought Johnson was a giant actually defensively. I thought it was excellent.
He was brilliant, wasn't he?
Really good. And like what I said about him at the time, was it was just a real captain's performance. You know, that's what's just complete refusal to lose, and you know, played so well. So I think you will see some changes around that, and then you get the songbook out and show the Hibs fans how to do it.
Yeah, you're right. We've given them a wee bit of credit about their vocals, but Celtic fans do it well, let's be honest. Alan, I agree with that actually on AJ. I was just thinking that when we were talking, and I was also thinking about Tony Ralston's performance against Dundee United. I thought he was really good. And I would need to look at his assists, but he seems to be very good at crossing that ball and finding a man in the box. Sometimes it's the low zipped cross from the touchline, and others it's the one that he played over that Ida eventually scored. Rotation is necessary, absolutely necessary. But all the players that have been mentioned by James and Brian, I'm confident with them domestically, Brian, Alan. I really am. There's a couple in there that, if you're up against Bayern Munich, you know, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure Yang is at that standard, for example. But against Hibs, I'm pretty happy to bring these guys in and give the rest to those guys that put so much into Tuesday night's game.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of intelligently managing the squad and rotating. So we've, since the sort of November international break, where we seem to have been playing every 3 days, we've averaged 3.6 lineup changes per game. That's quite high. I mean, normally it's around about 2.5. So one more change than normal, and we've often changed 5 or 6 players. 3, 4, 5, 6 players have been changed between games. So, and if you look at our injury profile as we get towards, well, we're now moving. Apart from this week we've got Aberdeen, haven't we? But apart from that, I think. When we get to the beginning of March, we are back to 1 game a week. So the need for rotation will lessen. And you might, yes, I agree, on the back of the Bayern Munich game, a huge amount of not just physical but emotional effort was put into that. Kuhn went off with what either was cramp or was a muscle strain. That's a worry. And the two fullbacks in particular were very very busy. And obviously, as you say, Hatate was the point of the counter press and the press, etc. So, yeah, everybody put in a tremendous amount of effort. Now, I am a fan of rotation, and I am a fan of good squad management. But there is a but, right? So I will say, this is the hardest game Celtic face between now and the split, right? And Celtic can win the league before the split, and I think Rodgers will want to go foot down. I think we've been playing often within ourselves. I don't mean that as a criticism. I think we've managed games very effectively throughout this long period of 2 games a week. Yes, there has been the odd sort of 6-0 against Dundee and so forth, but generally speaking, we've done enough to win games, and then we've kind of managed ourselves. We've managed to absorb rotations, and all in all, you just need to look at the injury list to see that I think credit is due to the club. I've criticised Rodgers for this in the past, so it's only fair to give credit that we've managed the squad well. But I think he will want to, and I would want to go as strong as you possibly can for this game, because, as I say, this is the hardest game that Celtic will face between now and the split. This is a team in form. I think they're unbeaten in 14 in all competitions. They've kind of done a reverse Aberdeen. They started appallingly, won 2 out of the first 15, and then they've been unbeaten since. But unlike Aberdeen, their underlying performance numbers were actually decent, and they're actually now very good. They're the only team with a significantly positive XG differential, meaning the difference between expected goals for, expected goals against. I think it's 0.2 per game. Hearts are just about there. I think Dundee United are like level, but Hibernian are the only team outside the top 2 that are significantly above. If you look at like an expected points projected league table, they would comfortably be 3rd if games had played out as the model would say they should, based on the underlying metrics. The thing that they've improved the most is defensively. They've always had decent attackers. Boyle. They've got a range of strikers they can play. They're all serviceable at this level. Boyle's been rejuvenated, been played in a more central role, and he's got a free role behind the striker to kind of wander where he wants, and he's kind of revitalised this season. Nicky Cadden's very effective on the left. In fact, to be fair, if you close him down, they don't have a lot of creativity in the rest of the midfield. But defensively, they've really tightened up. They've got a 3 at the back system, becomes a 5. They've got a goalkeeper in Jordan Smith who's been really solid. So this is going to be a very tough game. And so I would think we go as strong as we can on the basis that I would rather rotate players for Aberdeen at home in midweek than I would for this game, if I'm honest.
Makes
having said that, I've got no issue with McCowan for Hatate, and I think probably Kuhn may not make it, but otherwise I would not be looking to make many changes if possible.
You know that there's one other thing I'm going to ask you before we move on from that, Alan, and that is Schlupp. Now I know you won't have enough data to dig deep into that, but in terms of him and the impact he's made, and with one eye on the summer, where it looks inevitable almost that Greg Taylor's going to leave the football club, it's gone really quiet on that. He's out of contract at the end of the season. He's talking to other clubs. There's been interest, and he may well get what he wants elsewhere. We know Kieran Tierney's coming to the football club, Alan. From what you've seen, as an observer, from what you've seen, Schlupp, if we can do a deal to bring him in as a backup, would you be happy with that?
Well, in theory, when he signed, I was delighted on the basis of what the player that I thought he was. I've always been a big fan. I do like, he's an adaptable player. He can play many positions. He's an intelligent player, and he's got all the sort of physical attributes, and he's quick. So a lot to like there. And 32, but he's not someone he's not got ridiculous minutes in his legs. But yeah, he's been a Premiership footballer for 10 years, a regular. And I know he's not been playing a lot, obviously recently because he's been let go. And his first couple of games there were a few shaky moments, rust really, I would say. But he really came into his own, the other night in Munich. So I'm a big fan. I would be very keen for us to. And it feels cruel to Taylor, but that's football. I mean, we've been talking about the left back spot for years, and that's no harm to Greg Taylor. I think he's done the best. We've had the best of Greg Taylor and the best of himself, and that's a credit to him and his professionalism and his attitude and his work rate and his application and his ability. Because on the ball, he's turned into a really interesting inverted left back that adds a little bit of something different that not many left backs do. But you cannot replicate the physicality, the pace, the power, the speed especially. He just doesn't have that, and you can't invent that. You can't train that. You can't learn that. It's just not there. So we've talked about this for years. Schlupp has all that, even at 32. If he's happy to be Tierney's backup, but also he can cover midfield. He's mainly played as a midfielder actually in the last couple of years or so. So he can cover a number of positions. So I think he'd be an excellent squad player at 32. I think he's on 60 odd grand at Palace. We're not paying that. I think we're paying half of that. He's out of contract in the summer, so he'll be on nothing at that point. So I'm sure a deal could be done if he's happy, and I think all signs are that so far he is. So yeah, it would be a yes from me.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I also understand the frustration of somebody like Taylor, who reportedly is asking for 25, and then we bring Schlupp in on 30, for example, and Taylor will be thinking, what do I need to do to get that contract? And I agree with you, Alan. I think that he's done so well for us. We'll always look back on what Taylor has brought to Celtic over the last few years, and I think that you wish him well and he moves on, and let's hope that he goes on and improves as a player as well, maybe in a different league. I can't see him going to England. There's obviously been interest from elsewhere as well. Joe Hamilton, you're in on the YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, ladies and gents, last time I checked, we were 8 subscribers away from 32,000. I'm going to have a look at that just while I'm talking to you to see where we are. And if you haven't subscribed, please click the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. And hit the notifications key as well. And you will be told every time we go live and also every time a new video drops onto the channel. Tonight, This is Acsom is with Tijuana Bibles. Now, if you don't know what a Tijuana Bible is, go and Google it. right? But we do talk about that this evening with their frontman, Tony Costello. It's all things Celtic, all things music. Come along and join us. Actually, I said we were 8 away. We're now 10 away. 2 of you have unsubscribed since I said that. Thanks very much. That's what happens.
Welcome to subscription models, Paul. It's a bumpy ride.
Subscribe to us, and 2 of you unsubscribe. Thanks very much. Honestly, Joe Hamilton.
Sorry about that. It was probably my fault.
This could be the incentive Dermot needs to go all in with Brendan and the boys. Bring it on. I mean, see, with that in mind, with that comment in mind from Joe, and Colin Watt mentioned this yesterday, actually, Brendan Rodgers has got some real credit in the bank, James, isn't he? To say, well, look, you gave me the backing to bring in Engels and Ida and Trusty, and then again we brought in Jota, and we almost brought in Tierney, and that's going to happen in the summer. But I think he's definitely got a good argument to go back to the board in the summer and say, let's do it again. Let's bring in another 3 players. Let's spend another 30 million quid. And the big thing as a Celtic fan, because you've been through something similar in the past, is you're always a wee bit doubtful that it's going to happen. But the time seems right, James, for us to go and do that again. I expect us, and I mentioned yesterday, and I hope it doesn't happen because I hate losing quality players. I expect us to lose one, because history will tell us that happens, right? We lost Jota, O'Reilly, Kyogo. History tells us that happens. If we do, as long as we bring in 3, and that's over and above Kieran Tierney, of the kind of similar kind of level of and standard of player as Engels and Ida and Trusty, then we progress, we move on, we continue to look forward in Europe. Is that the way you look at it, James? And are you confident that the board will do that?
Yeah, I think in particular when you look at the last window, obviously financially, obviously was back, but if you look at the profiles of the players that were brought in for Rodgers to take us to the next level in Europe, like Trusty has been brilliant. Like obviously his main attributes are his speed and his strength and his athleticism, but he's not a natural ball playing defender. Arnie Engels is not a natural replacement for Matt O'Reilly, or wasn't. I'm not dissing him. Like he has been a brilliant player for us so far. But if you look at the profile the player Rodgers was given, like he has had to kind of mold his team into his philosophy and into Champions League players. Like they weren't natural fits. And so I think in particular Rodgers should be given credit for that in terms of his coaching, in terms of getting Austin Trusty confident enough to really play out from the back when you're in the Allianz Arena. Again, that's against one of the best teams in the world, like giving him the confidence to do that and really kind of molding this team into a Champions League club without giving the perfect players to do so, if you kind of understand what I'm saying. So I think in the summer, I think hopefully Rodgers will be back once again. But again, it's not just about the financially, it's kind of about the recruitment wise and do we have trust in the likes of Paul Hillsdale and stuff after the January window. Lots obviously contentious takes on that. But I think hopefully, Desmond has hopefully seen, he was at the answer and he's seen where Rodgers has taken this team with what he's been given, and hopefully he's thinking if we really kind of sort out the recruitment behind the scenes, really take it to a new level, and we can be really, really smart. And then I think if we do that while also backing them, I think we can go to the next level and kind of continually progress in Europe, because it's about getting the right kind of profile of players in, as well as we've seen with the summer window. It was about kind of physically kind of gifted players who have speed, players who have strength, and that kind of masks our other deficiencies. So I think that's kind of the main kind of trait that Rodgers will be looking for in the summer, and hopefully he can build on that, and Desmond will back him in the summer, because I think the evidence is there that we do have the perfect manager to kind of mold us into a real kind of consistent Champions League group stage side.
Yeah, I think the word he used was seasoned, and that gave you the sense that he's looking to do this year on year. Another thing that I found quite interesting, Brian, that Brendan Rodgers did say the other day was the fact that in terms of his own approach last time round, and he put this down to inexperience, he says he was unrealistic last time round. So maybe the demands he was making back then were unrealistic, and now he's working more cohesively with the board. And I take that as a huge positive, because it was always a worry, wasn't it, Brian? You're going to fall out again and disappear, and because we've been scorned before. But that allayed some of my fears the other day when he said that, Brian.
Yeah, I think so. And to be fair, like people say about backing Brendan, but he got backed, and he spent a lot of money, but the club made a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So the model's still working, right? So as long as the model works, I think he'll be backed. Because if they can go well, we can sign Arnie Engels for 11 million, probably 2 years, try and sell him for 40. or 30 odd. It seems like Matt O'Reilly was nearly 30. Then it pays for itself. And if you can prove that by, I mean, how much money have we made for the Champions League this season just in terms of the games? Was it something like 38 million? Like, it was a lot of money, I think.
Yeah.
So that's paid for the transfers anyway. Plus, you made money on the transfers for selling players. So I think we'll get the money, and I think it'll be spent properly. So I think this idea of I'm not getting backed is maybe a tad unfair on this occasion. Now, I know people point to January for that, but it could have been the case that, because he's very keen on, who was it he was talking about? But I think it was when clubs were in for Matt O'Reilly, and he says, I know the value of the player. I know what they're worth at this stage in their career, at this level. That's the money. If we don't get it, we're not selling them. And I think that's his attitude to buying players. Like, I get the feeling that when it was, is it Kitsfin? Is that how you say his name?
Fitzgarden, yeah.
Fitzgarden. Well, he's maybe not saw him as a 15 or 14 million pound player. So he's maybe wanted him and thought, no, they're fleecing us. So we don't quite know how all that worked out. There is some weird question marks as to why Hugo was allowed to go. And I spoke about this last week. There is a lack of logic sometimes. But I think in terms of the budgets, I think they'll be there. And I think, to James's point, and Alan and I made this earlier as well, if we're signing the right profile player in terms of that physicality, that helps just with that squad, that extra power and pace. And I think that looks like the mould he's going to try and bring. So I would imagine that's what we'll look for, more of that sort of next season onward.
We could probably have an entire 1 hour discussion about whether or not we would have scored one of those 5 chances had Kyogo been on the park. But that's, that's just one of the twisted things that you put yourself through as a football fan, isn't it, Alan? You think to yourself, oh, we would have won that game. Really? Who knows? Paul McLean, you're on the YouTube. Don't unsubscribe, please. This could be their Fergus McCann moment. I'm picking this up. I believe this has got something to do with the fact that Celtic have had a tremendous run in Europe, a brilliant performance the other night. Rangers are getting pumped from Queen's Park. Season ticket sales are just round the corner. The narrative then gets turned, and this is Scottish football, and this is the way it works, and we're not going to focus too much on it. I seem to believe everyone thinking Souness would amount to nothing in '86. I take exception to that, Paul, because I've got another theory in relation to that with regards to Scottish football history. Scottish football had no debt. They had no debt when Graham Souness took over at Rangers, and it completely changed with regards to the spend at that point. We know how it went down. I don't see it as a Scottish football revolution. I think it was the beginning of the end in terms of Scottish football as a European force, in actual fact. And you've got the facts and everything else, and what happened in 2012 proved that it was unsustainable. This is completely different. And we're not going to labour it, but I'm going to throw it to Alan, because Alan's been quite vocal about it on the socials and on our WhatsApp group as well. Alan, in relation to this, right, something has got to happen, because they are in a downward spiral, and I think on average they've probably lost £1 million a month since their inception in 2012. But even if it is a big investment, and I'm not going to believe it until I see it, moonbeams and wealth, billionaires and all this nonsense and floating hotels, I've read it all, don't believe any of it. If they do get a massive investment, it's not a case of there's a big tranche of cash, go and buy some players. That's not how football works anymore, is it?
Well, because funnily enough, the owner of the San Francisco 49ers, Denise York, who attended St. Mary's College of Indiana, a Catholic women's college, and is a well-renowned Catholic philanthropist in the San Francisco Bay Area. I believe she had a picture of John Gregg on her wall when she was a wee girl, so you never know. No, listen, despite the deadheads that are running with us and the journalists that we know that are running with us, who have never had an original thought in their life and will print whatever they're given by their friendly Rangers handlers without question, without interrogation, without research. Despite all of that, there's clearly something in this. And so it's really a case of, for the rest of Scottish football, we have to sift through the crap, really, and the ridiculousness and the fantasy to try and work out what is actually happening here. And this isn't actually a surprising development, because, as you say, the club, as it stands at the moment, has got a diverse, disparate ownership structure. Apparently, many of the shareholder groups don't get on very well. The shares are increasingly being diluted with every passing quarter when they issue more. So everybody's holdings kind of going down a little bit. These people have, as Dave King says, Dave King does occasionally speak the truth. For a serial, liar and convicted criminal, he does sometimes utter words of truth. And he's talked about investor fatigue. It's not really, I mean, they use this word investor. It's basically giving the football club some of your personal wealth for them to put down a black hole that you'll never see again in exchange for some worthless shares. If that's investment, I'm going to go down to the building society with my pension, and I'm not going to invest it. Right? It's not investment, right? So anyway, so they've got investor fatigue. They're not, very unfortunate what happened to poor John Bennett. He's obviously not in great health. How much more energy and money is he willing to put into it? All of that. It's very difficult to see where they go from here in terms of actually growing as a football club. Now, there's no danger of them going out of business. And in fact, the current austerity drive that their wonderfully blunt and honest manager has been very open about, the information that he gave to Sky TV that was absolutely ignored by everybody in the Scottish media last week, that the wage bill had to be cut by between 20 and 30%, tells you that they're in the middle of an austerity drive because they're trying to, for the first time ever, and you mentioned 1986 there, I don't believe any club out of Ibrox has made a profit since about 1985, right? So you take all that together, and it's a football club that traditionally loses money. Why do they lose money? Because the only way that they can compete with Celtic, which is the real focus of both of their fans and the board, is competing with Celtic, is they have to spend more than they bring in, because they've got at least a 10 to 15 million deficit built in structurally to Celtic each and every single season, on top of their desperately poor commercial performance, based on the fact that it's a very specific brand with a very specific appeal, and they manage to end up in court with virtually every commercial partner that they do business with. It's a toxic brand. It's also a delinquent brand. Yet another tax shenanigans have come to light this week. That's a pretty hard sell. The upside to all that is, if you're an investor, there's clearly some room for growth there. There's clearly a lot of inefficiencies in there, and they're clearly not, getting bang for their buck across the operation. So then you think, well, okay, and what does the current landscape look like in football? And actually, there's a couple of trends that work towards this being not the fantasy land that it's being presented to us, and there may be some kernels of truth underneath all of that fluff. So the first thing is, there is definitely interest from American hedge funds, investment private equity groups, and these sports franchises to invest in sports clubs and sports franchises. That is definitely a trend in the market. And the second thing is, there is an increasing trend within England to look to Scotland and Ireland to build relationships with clubs in those countries as a means of getting access to players. It's certainly 18 and below, because there's restrictions because of the Brexit. Another Brexit dividend, there's so many of them. Another Brexit dividend is they cannot now bring in 18-year-olds and younger, which I think is a good thing, actually, that they can't do that, into the country from France, Belgium, wherever in Europe. So suddenly English and Scottish, Irish young players do now have more utility in the market, more value in the market, because of this, and they want to get, and that's why that's why Celtic keep losing players, and other clubs in Scotland. I think a lad from St Johnstone, 15, the other day is being signed up by Arsenal or somebody. This is the trend. This is a growing trend, and it's why Bournemouth have invested in Hibernian, and it's one of the reasons that Tony Bloom has invested in Hearts. So this is all, these things are all pointing to some kernel of truth in that. But if you're, as I say, if you're a private equity group, you might have that San Francisco logo on it, but essentially it's an investment arm of a bigger group. Why would you invest? Why would you put money into the regions? Well, it might be for those reasons. It might be basically to become essentially what Hibs are to Bournemouth, the Rangers will be to Leeds United, a place where you can have access to their youth setup, access to Scottish young talent to then bring into your own system. You might be a place where you could perhaps loan players. It's perhaps a place where you can test and learn on some of your technology that you're using and share some of that. You might want to send some coaches up to get experience, and all that. But it's not an easy thing to do. That's the sort of Bournemouth Hibs model. They've got a 25% stake in Hibs, so they don't own Hibs. And when the 49er Enterprises took over Leeds, they didn't go all in on buying Leeds. They bought like a 15% stake, and then over the last 7 years, they've gradually increased as they've understood the business. So it was a very cautious approach, actually. And it was only in the last year that they've gone all in and actually taken ownership of Leeds United. And of course, what have they done? They've saddled them with the debt that they used to buy the club. So so that's one model, and I could see that being a possibility. But I would suspect if it's the 49ers Enterprises Group that they would start slowly. So they might start with a 10% or something like that. And guess what? One of the major shareholders in the Rangers, in fact, the major shareholder, has been agitating for years to sell his shares that he paid nothing for. So it's all pure profit to him. And he's been trying to find someone to buy the damn things for a long time. And guess what? He's one of these people that feeds some of these journalists that I've mentioned, works them from the back without question. So all of that. And then you've got to consider there's another model. The other model here is the one that I'd be really worried about, which is what Tony Bloom's doing with Hearts. So that isn't a takeover. I don't think Tony Bloom's got any ambition to own Hearts. What this is more of a taking Tony Bloom's intellectual property, inserting it into another club, and then gaining value from it. And that means really the sort of intellectual capital of James at Town Analytics, all of the scouting intelligence, and so on and so forth, with a view to turning Hearts into a far more efficient, effective football team, and then making everybody some money, because you're only got to jump one place in Scotland to be second, and you can probably then get into Europe and in the group stages. And for a club like Hearts, and the value of Hearts, that's a low risk bet for somebody like Tony Bloom. You're not going to have to spend a lot of money, right? So not spending a lot of money to get in the door, sharing all your IP, making sudden and dramatic improvements in a very inefficiently run club. That's what they did at Union Saint-Gilloise, and that's what I think he'll do at Hearts. And I think you'll see Hearts improving over the next year or so. But I don't think that's what this play is. This isn't that. This is more the sort of Black Knights, Bournemouth with Hibs, and it's more the 49ers Enterprises with Leeds, but this is more like a one step removed. I'm still astonished that if they would go all in on a club like the Rangers, because it's just it would be so difficult for them to buy into the club. It will be too expensive. You'll have to pay off all of these shareholders. You'll have to find 4 or 5 of these disparate shareholders who all own sort of between 7 and 12%, let's say, to get a controlling stake. All of them will want somewhere in the region of 20, 25 pence a share for shares that are effectively worthless. So you're not giving the club money. You're spending tens and tens of millions of pounds to pay off these shareholders to then get a controlling interest. And none of that money goes into the football club. And you're already tens of millions of pounds down. So then what do you do? You can't then throw money at the football club, because all the money that goes into the football operation has to be demonstrably from football revenue. So you can't just gift it, right? So you got to comply with even the SFA can't turn a blind eye to the UEFA FSR regulations. They can turn a blind eye to ownership rules, and I'm sure they will. They can turn a blind eye like they do to fit and proper tests, like they do with David King, career criminal, biggest shareholder in the Rangers. They will turn a blind eye to that, but they can't turn a blind eye to UEFA FSR. So long story short, and I'm sorry to have droned on about this, is I'm sure there's something in it, right? There's different models. This is kind of the way the industry is going at the moment. It's kind of how people are seeing Scottish football teams. If it was me, I would be looking at a Hibs and Aberdeen, Dundee United, because for a few £1 million, you can get a significant stake. You have not spent a lot of money, and you can probably make a big difference very quickly. This is a different proposition. This is going to cost you tens of millions to take out the existing shareholders, and by the way, they want their loans paid back as well, right? So significant investment of that scale doesn't stack up to me, but I could see them trying to maybe get 10% and then seeing how it goes. But it would be very much a sort of, you're a feeder club for us, and it's not going to be some sort of major, life-changing, injection of billions of squillions of confetti. That's just not. I just don't see how that's going to happen.
That was tremendous, Alan.
You've not droned on, Alan. You've not droned on. What I would make the point of saying is, a couple of weeks ago we had Ken McKenna, a brilliant journalist, former editor of the Celtic View, talking about how all the best stuff that he reads these days are on Celtic blogs. And what I would say is, what you've put across there and what Liam Carrigan put across on the Acsom blog is better than anything out there in the mainstream in relation to covering this story, because it is a story. But instead of just running with the narrative that has been prodded, as you say, from behind, you've done a bit of legwork, you've done a bit of investigation, and the way that you've explained it there is far closer to the truth, to the point where you got a standing ovation from Brian Degnan. Now, Brian, I don't know if you need to nip off, mate, right now. I would just want to ask a couple of wee things, or bring up a couple of wee things in relation to the canonisation of Tommy Burns. Oh, my word, incredible. It's incredible. A bid has been made and submitted to the Bishop of Paisley, a recognition of sainthood to Tommy Burns. Tommy Burns is going to be a saint before we rename Lennoxtown after him. That's incredible, isn't it? The other thing is the comments made by, I'm not going to swear because, there's families watching this, but Eyal Berkovic, the comments he's made, I'm going to ask you about this, James, because Berkovic, we bought him from West Ham, where he was an ex-teammate of John Hartson's, and John Hartson speaks about that incident as being one of his biggest regrets in his football career. And we sold him to Manchester City. And if we could, we'd airbrush him out of the club's history based on his performance and nothing else. £6 million almost down the drain. He was a difficult guy in the dressing room. You just have to speak to his ex-teammates. And what he has said when referring to the Irish is that they have a crazy hatred towards us. James French, what was your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much about it because it's just a bit of an irrelevant thing. It just seems a bit irrelevant, but in terms of Irish support of Palestine, Celtic support of Palestine, it's support for people in struggle, people who are going through what Irish people went through kind of for hundreds of years, and being discriminated against, ethnic cleansing, all those sorts of things. And I think it's kind of a throwaway comment to people who call them out, calling people who support Palestine, Irish people, anti-Semitic and Jew haters. I think it's simply not true, and I think it's just kind of a way of justifying what they're doing in Palestine, which is completely wrong and needs to be called out. And Celtic are obviously one of those clubs who are calling it out. Galatasaray obviously the other night as well, and I think hopefully more clubs will start to call it out. More countries will start to call it out, because it's just it's awful. And as Celtic fans, as Irish people, we all recognise their struggle, and that's why we support it. It's nothing to do with religion, it's nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And I think it's kind of simple as that. I don't think any more needs to be said about it.
Absolutely. James and Alan, the voice of reason today, Brian. I've been happy to sit back and listen to these guys.
It's been brilliant. It's been brilliant. And
yeah.
Just on the 49ers thing, I just hope that the face painter finally gets paid. That's my only hope for investment if it gets in. That would be a dream scenario.
I wonder who the face painter is. Who are you? Do you
Get one. This is Acsom.
Have you unsubscribed during the last 1 hour? If you have, get subscribing back onto the channel. We're only 10 short of 32,000. Come on, make my Friday night. And tune back in on This Is Acsom tonight at 6 o'clock, where we will be joined by Tony Costello of the Tijuana Bibles, brilliant band from Glasgow, Coatbridge, of all places. Thank you, every single one of you, for getting involved. If you want to come and see us live, we're with Johan Mjällby, who is one of only 30 players who have played in a European final for Celtic, and he'll be with us on Thursday at Gracie's. The ticket link is underneath this video. Thanks for joining us, and thank you to James, Alan and Brian for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind.